The transport ship docked at Harmony Point with barely a whisper. Commander Lisa Martinez stepped onto the station that housed the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. She carried only a small bag and wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's defense forces. Around her, beings from dozens of worlds moved through the corridors with purpose. Lisa had never seen anything like this place. The station stretched for miles in every direction, its walls made of materials that seemed to shift color as she watched. Alien cadets marched past in formation, their various forms creating a parade of the galaxy's finest warriors. Some walked on 4 legs, others floated above the ground, and a few seemed to be made of pure energy. "Commander Martinez?" A voice spoke behind her in perfect English. She turned to see a tall, thin being with silver skin and 4 arms. "I am Veltar of the Zephyrian Council. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy." Lisa nodded respectfully. She had studied the files on her way here. Veltar was one of the most powerful military minds in the galaxy. His species had been fighting wars for over 10,000 years, and their tactical knowledge was legendary. "Thank you for having me," Lisa said. "I'm honored to be here." Veltar's large black eyes studied her carefully. "Your species is new to galactic warfare. We are curious to see what humans can contribute to our ancient traditions." As they walked through the academy, Veltar explained the layout. There were training grounds that could simulate any environment in the galaxy, classrooms equipped with technology that could project entire star systems for study, libraries containing the military knowledge of every member species of the Galactic Council. "Your students will include officers from 12 different worlds," Veltar said. "Each brings their own military heritage. The Brutarians are master warriors. The Etherians understand energy warfare better than anyone. The Synthetics calculate battle outcomes with perfect precision." They stopped outside a large classroom with transparent walls. Inside, Lisa could see her first class waiting. There were about 30 students, representing at least 8 different species. Some sat in chairs designed for their body types, others stood, and a few hovered in the air. "They expect to learn human battle tactics," Veltar said. "Your species' recent victories against the Void Raiders have impressed many. They want to understand your methods." Lisa smiled. "I'll do my best to teach them something useful." The classroom fell silent as Lisa entered. She set her bag on the desk and looked at each student. A massive Brutarian with scales like armor sat in the front row. Next to him, an Etherian's energy form pulsed with curiosity. In the back, several humanoid species watched her with interest. "Good morning," Lisa said. "I'm Lisa Martinez from Earth. Before we begin, I have a question for you." She moved to the center of the room. "What is the purpose of a wall?" A Brutarian officer raised his clawed hand. "Protection. Defense against enemies." "Walls keep things out," added a Zephyrian cadet. "They create barriers," said another student. Lisa nodded, thoughtfully. "Good answers. All correct." She paused and looked around the room. "But have you considered what walls teach us about doors?" The students exchanged confused glances. A synthetic officer tilted its metallic head. "Could you clarify the connection between walls and doors in tactical applications?" "Think about it," Lisa said. "A wall exists to keep something out or keep something in. But a door exists because sometimes you need to go through the wall. Every barrier implies a passage. Every defense suggests an attack route." She moved to the window and gestured outside at the station's defensive positions. This academy has walls, shields, and weapons protecting it, but it also has docking bays, airlocks, and communication arrays. Each one is both a strength and a weakness, depending on how you look at it. An Etherean student pulsed brighter. Are you suggesting that all defenses create vulnerabilities? I'm suggesting that everything depends on perspective, Lisa replied. A wall that protects you from the north might hide an enemy approaching from the south. In the observation booth above the classroom, 3 members of the Galactic Defense Council watched through one-way glass. Veltar made notes on his tablet while Admiral Korthak, a massive Brutarian war chief, frowned with disapproval. "This is not tactical instruction," Korthak growled. "She speaks in riddles." The third observer, Thisiara of the Etherians, watched, with more interest. Her energy form shifted through different colors as she processed the lesson. Perhaps there is more here than it appears. Back in the classroom, Lisa continued her unconventional lesson. She asked students to consider the shape of their formations. Why did Brutarians fight in rigid lines? Why did Zephyrians prefer circular patterns? What did these choices reveal about how each species thought about space and movement? On Earth, Lisa said, we studied many different approaches to conflict. Some animals hunt alone, others in packs. Some build elaborate traps, others rely on speed. Each method works, but only in the right situation. A young Brutarian officer leaned forward. "What method do humans use?" Lisa smiled. "That's what we'll explore together. But first, you need to understand that there isn't just one human method. We learned from everything we fought alongside and everything we fought against." As the class ended, students filed out looking puzzled but intrigued. Many clustered in small groups, discussing what they had heard. The concepts weren't entirely foreign, but the way Lisa presented them felt different from anything they had learned before. In the observation booth, the council members prepared to leave. Veltar closed his tablet with a sharp click. "I will review the recorded session. Perhaps human teaching methods require more analysis." Korthak stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the room. "My species has conquered 17 star systems using proven tactics. We do not need philosophy lessons." Thisara floated silently for a moment before speaking. "The humans defeated the Void Raiders using unconventional methods. Perhaps conventional wisdom should question itself." That evening, Lisa sat in her assigned quarters reviewing files on her students. Each species had thousands of years of military tradition. Each had developed fighting techniques perfectly suited to their biology and psychology. Her job wasn't to replace their knowledge, but to help them see beyond the boundaries of their own experience. She looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. Somewhere out there, threats existed that none of the galaxy's traditional military thinking could handle alone. The Council had invited humanity to share their knowledge, but they expected lessons in tactics and technology. What they were going to get was something much more fundamental. Lisa planned to teach them not just how humans fought, but how humans learned to fight differently every time they needed to. She would show them that the greatest weapon wasn't any particular strategy or technology. The greatest weapon was the ability to become something new when the old ways weren't enough. 3 months into Lisa's assignment, Chief Engineer Draktal stared at his screen in confusion. The massive crystalline being's geometric form shifted through several color patterns as he ran the diagnostic for the 3rd time. The results remained the same, and they made no sense. "Nexus 7, he called to the synthetic intelligence. "Please verify these readings." The sleek metallic figure approached Draktal's workstation. Nexus 7's optical sensors scanned the data in milliseconds. Planetary defense grid efficiency has increased by 23.7% compared to baseline measurements from 4 months ago. That's impossible, Draktal replied, his crystalline structure resonating with frustration. No modifications have been made to the hardware. No software updates were installed. The same personnel operate the same systems. Nexus 7 processed. This contradiction with mechanical precision. The improvement appears to have begun approximately 2 weeks after the human instructor's arrival. However, correlation does not imply causation. Run a complete system analysis, Draktal ordered. Check every component, every circuit, every line of code. While the engineers searched for technical explanations, the Academy continued its daily routines. Lisa's classes had settled into a pattern that students found both frustrating and fascinating. She never gave direct answers, but somehow her questions led them to discoveries they hadn't expected. Captain Amy Rodriguez arrived on a routine inspection shuttle that morning. The human tactical officer was officially there to evaluate the Academy's training programs and report back to Earth Command. Unofficially, she was curious about the stories reaching human space about Lisa's unusual teaching methods. Amy observed one of Lisa's classes from the back of the room. The lesson that day focused on a simple question. What is the difference between winning and surviving? A young Brutarian officer immediately raised his hand. Winning means defeating your enemy. Surviving means living through the battle. Good. Distinction, Lisa said. But what if I told you that sometimes winning and losing happen at the same time? The students looked puzzled. An Etherian cadet pulsed with curiosity. How can someone win and lose simultaneously? Lisa activated the hologram projector, showing a recording from Earth's ancient history. 2 armies faced each other across a battlefield. The larger force charged forward with overwhelming strength, crushing their opponents completely. Who won this battle? Lisa asked. The larger army, several students answered. Now watch the same events from a wider perspective, Lisa said. The hologram zoomed out, showing the larger strategic situation. The victorious army had won the battle but lost so many soldiers that they couldn't defend their homeland. Within months, a third force conquered their weakened territory. They won the battle and lost the war, observed a Zephyrian cadet. More than that, Lisa said. They defined victory so narrowly that they couldn't see the larger pattern. They optimized for one outcome and created vulnerabilities they never considered. Amy watched the students process this concept. She could see them beginning to think beyond the immediate tactical level toward broader strategic considerations. More importantly, they were learning to question their assumptions about what success actually meant. After class, Amy met with the Galactic Defense Council. The 3 senior members sat around a conference table that adjusted its shape to accommodate their different forms. Veltar's 4 arms gestured as he spoke, while Korthak's massive frame dominated one side of the room. Thisara floated above, her designated space, her energy form cycling through contemplative colors. Captain Rodriguez, Veltar began. We requested this meeting to discuss concerns about your colleagues' instructional methods. Amy kept her expression neutral. What kind of concerns? She teaches philosophy instead of tactics, Korthak rumbled. My cadets need battle training, not poetry lessons. Her answers are always indirect, Veltar added. Students ask specific questions about military procedures and receive metaphorical stories in response. Amy nodded thoughtfully. And how Are the students performing? This question seemed to catch the council members off guard. Thisara spoke first, her voice like distant music. Performance metrics show unusual patterns. Traditional measurements indicate some decline, but practical capabilities have improved significantly. Could you be more specific? Amy asked. Veltar consulted his tablet. Response times to unexpected situations have improved by an average of 31%. Creative problem-solving scores have increased dramatically. Students are developing solutions that fall outside established tactical doctrine. And you see this as a problem? Amy's tone remained diplomatically neutral. Korthak leaned forward, his yellow eyes intense. Established doctrine exists because it works. Thousands of years of military science have proven these methods effective. Against known threats using familiar approaches, Amy agreed. But what about unknown threats using unfamiliar approaches? Before anyone could respond, Draktal's voice echoed through the station's communication system. Council members, please report to the Defense Operations Center immediately. We have a significant anomaly. The group hurried through the academies, corridors to the massive chamber that housed the station's defensive systems. Holographic displays showed every aspect of Harmony Point's protection grid. Weapons, shields, sensors, and communication arrays were represented by complex patterns of light and data. Show them the readings, Nexus 7 said to Draktal. The engineer's crystalline form pulsed nervously. 3 hours ago, we detected unauthorized modifications to our defense grid. But there are no modifications. The system is performing beyond its designed parameters without any technical changes. Amy studied the displays with professional interest. What kind of performance improvements? Response coordination between different defensive systems has improved by over 20%. Nexus 7 reported. Threat assessment algorithms are identifying patterns they were never programmed to recognize. The entire network is operating as if it has been upgraded with superior software, but no upgrades have occurred. Thisara's energy form brightened suddenly. When did these improvements begin? Draktal checked his logs. Approximately 6 weeks ago. The changes have been gradual but consistent. That timeline correlates with observable changes in student behavior, Thisara observed. Students trained in the humans' methods have been assigned to various operational positions throughout the academy. Korthak frowned. You're suggesting that students are somehow improving our defense systems? I'm suggesting that students trained to think differently are operating our defense systems differently, Thisara replied. The technology hasn't changed, but how it's being used has evolved. Amy watched the council members grapple with this possibility. She had seen similar effects during her own career, though never on this scale. Human military philosophy emphasized adaptation over standardization, flexibility over rigid doctrine. The results could be surprising to allies who expected predictable methods. Captain Rodriguez, Veltar said carefully, perhaps you could clarify human military doctrine for us? Amy considered her response. Lisa's approach was working, but explaining it directly might undermine its effectiveness. Students were learning to think differently precisely because they had to discover these concepts themselves. Human military doctrine emphasizes environmental adaptation, Amy said finally. We believe that the best tactics for any situation emerge from understanding both your own capabilities and your environment's constraints. This requires flexible thinking rather than predetermined responses. Flexible thinking, Korthak repeated, skeptically. What does that mean in practical terms? Amy gestured toward the defensive displays around them. It means teaching operators to see their systems as tools that can be used in ways their designers never imagined. It means encouraging guards to watch for threats that don't match their training protocols. It means accepting that the best solution to any problem might not be the one you learned in school. The council members exchanged glances. These concepts weren't entirely foreign to their military traditions, but the emphasis was different. Most galactic military doctrine focused on perfecting established methods. The human approach seemed to focus on constantly developing new methods. We need to understand these changes better, Veltar decided. The Academy's reputation depends on predictable, proven training methods. These unexplained improvements could raise questions about our standards. Amy nodded diplomatically. I'm sure Commander Martinez would be happy to explain her methods, if you ask the right questions. As the meeting ended, Thisara lingered in the operations center, studying the defensive displays. The improvements were real and significant. More importantly, they suggested that the Academy students were beginning to think about familiar systems in unfamiliar ways. She thought about Lisa's question from that morning's class. What is the difference between winning and surviving? Perhaps the answer was that winning meant achieving your objectives, while surviving meant remaining capable of achieving new objectives when circumstances changed. The human instructor wasn't just teaching tactics or strategies. She was teaching adaptability itself. And if these early results were any indication, that might be the most valuable military skill in a galaxy full of unknown threats. The improvements weren't stopping. Chief Engineer Draktal discovered that defense grids at 3 different Academy training facilities showed the same mysterious enhancements. Training Station Alpha, located near the asteroid fields, reported a 32% improvement in threat detection. Research Station Beta had somehow developed better coordination between its automated systems. Even the remote listening post at Station Gamma was identifying signal patterns its sensors had never been programmed to recognize. This is spreading, Draktal reported to the Emergency Council session. His crystalline form flickered through nervous color patterns. Whatever is causing these improvements is affecting multiple installations. Nexus 7 projected a galactic map showing the affected stations. All locations have one common factor: personnel who have attended the human instructors' classes. Admiral, Korthak slammed his massive fist on the table, making the entire room shake. This is unacceptable. We cannot have unexplained modifications to our defense systems, regardless of whether they appear beneficial. Veltar's 4 arms moved in agitated gestures. The Academy Board of Directors is demanding explanations. Other military institutions are questioning our standards. Some are suggesting that we're using unauthorized technology. Thisara floated silently for a moment, her energy form cycling through thoughtful patterns. Perhaps we're approaching this incorrectly. Instead of asking how these improvements are happening, we should ask why they're happening. In the training facilities, the changes were becoming more apparent. A Brutarian officer named Karseth had accomplished something that shocked his instructors. During a combat simulation, he had successfully defended a position by doing something no Brutarian had ever done in recorded history. He retreated strategically. Brutarians never retreated. Their military doctrine for 10,000 years had emphasized holding ground and overwhelming enemies through superior strength and determination. But Karseth had fallen back from his initial position, drawing the enemy forward until they overextended their advance. Then he counterattacked from an unexpected angle, achieving victory with minimal casualties. "Explain your tactics," his instructor demanded after the simulation. Karseth struggled to put his thoughts into words. The instructor Martinez asked us to consider what happens when strength meets flexibility. I realized that my position was strong, but it was also predictable. The enemy knew where I would be and how I would respond. So you abandoned your post? No, Karseth said carefully. I used my post as bait. I let them think they were forcing me to retreat, but I was actually choosing when and where to engage them. This kind of tactical innovation was happening throughout the Academy. A Zephyrian pilot had modified her squadron's traditional circular formation, creating a pattern that could shift between offensive and defensive configurations depending on circumstances. A team of Etherian strategists had developed a coordination method that combined their species' natural energy sensing abilities with communication techniques they learned from studying Earth's social animals. Lieutenant Sam Parker arrived that week with a diplomatic courier ship. The young human communications specialist was officially delivering routine reports to Captain Rodriguez. Unofficially, he was investigating reports that had reached Earth Command about unusual developments. At the Academy, Sam attended one of Lisa's classes as an observer. That day's lesson focused on communication systems, but in Lisa's characteristic style, she approached the topic indirectly. "How do you know when someone is lying?" she asked the class. A synthetic officer responded immediately. Vocal stress, analysis, micro-expression detection, and physiological monitoring can identify deception with 93% accuracy. Good technical answer, Lisa said. But what if the person isn't intentionally lying? What if they believe something that isn't true? The students exchanged glances. A crystalline cadet's form shifted colors as she processed the question. Truth is objective. Facts are verifiable. Are they? Lisa smiled. Let me tell you about Earth's early space exploration. When we first left our planet, our scientists were absolutely certain about the laws of physics. They had equations that worked perfectly in every test. Then we encountered gravitational anomalies that our laws couldn't explain. She activated the hologram projector, showing images of space phenomena that defied conventional understanding. Were our scientists lying? No. Were they wrong? Partially. The laws they knew were true within the limits of their experience, but incomplete when applied to larger scales. Sam watched the students struggle with this concept. Truth as a relative concept challenged their fundamental assumptions about knowledge and certainty. So how do we communicate accurate information if truth itself is uncertain? Asked an Etherian student. By staying curious, Lisa replied. By assuming that what we know is useful but incomplete. By listening for information that doesn't match our expectations instead of filtering it out. After class, Sam met with the council members. His conversations with them followed the same pattern that had frustrated them with other human officers. When asked direct questions about human military doctrine, he provided indirect answers that seemed to avoid the subject entirely. "Lieutenant Parker," Veltar said with barely concealed irritation, "we need specific information about human tactical methods. Your species has achieved remarkable military successes. What technologies or strategies enabled these victories?" Sam considered the question carefully. "I think you might be asking the wrong question, sir." "Explain." "You're asking about our technologies and strategies, but those change depending on circumstances. Maybe you should ask about our assumptions and priorities." Korthak leaned forward menacingly. "Speak plainly, human." Sam didn't seem intimidated by the massive Brutarian. "We assume that every situation is unique. We prioritize learning over winning when those two goals conflict." We believe that the best solution to any problem probably hasn't been invented yet. Thaisara pulsed brighter. You approach warfare as an educational process rather than an application of established doctrine. Something like that, Sam agreed. We figure that enemies who can defeat our current methods will eventually appear, so we'd better get good at developing new methods quickly. The council members found this conversation as frustrating as their previous encounters with human officers. Every answer seemed to generate more questions instead of providing clear explanations. Meanwhile, the mysterious improvements continued spreading. Defense coordinators reported that their systems were somehow anticipating threats more effectively. Communication networks were developing redundancies and backup protocols that nobody had programmed. Patrol schedules were optimizing themselves for better coverage with fewer resources. The changes weren't limited to technical systems. Personnel assigned to various academy functions were developing capabilities that exceeded their training. A mixed-species maintenance crew had figured out how to repair equipment using techniques that weren't in any manual. Security teams were identifying potential problems before they became actual threats. Draktal spent his days running diagnostics that revealed nothing wrong and everything improved. The systems are performing beyond specifications, he reported to anyone who would listen. It's as if they're learning. Systems don't learn, Nexus 7 observed. Systems operate according to their programming. Then explain this, Draktal said, displaying his latest analysis. Defensive coordination has improved again. Response times are faster. Pattern recognition is more sophisticated. Threat assessment is more accurate. But the code hasn't changed. Nexus 7 processed this information with mechanical precision. The logical conclusion is that operators are using existing systems in ways that weren't originally intended. But how did they learn to do that? Their training didn't include advanced system optimization. The answer was becoming clear to Thaisara, though she wasn't sure the others were ready to accept it. Lisa's teaching methods weren't just affecting student performance in classroom exercises. They were changing how students thought about every aspect of their duties. A cadet trained to question assumptions about defensive formations would naturally question assumptions about defensive systems. A student taught to look for unconventional solutions to tactical problems would apply that same thinking to operational challenges. An officer who learned to combine different approaches would find ways to use equipment beyond its designed parameters. The human instructor wasn't teaching specific skills or techniques. She was teaching a way of thinking that applied to everything. And that way of thinking was spreading throughout the academy like a virus of innovation. That evening, Thaisara visited Lisa in her quarters. The Etherian Council member found the human reading reports on student progress. Commander Martinez, Thaisara said, I believe I'm beginning to understand your methods. Lisa looked up with interest. What do you understand? You're not teaching military tactics. You're teaching cognitive flexibility. You're training students to think beyond the limitations of their species' traditional approaches. Lisa smiled. That's a very perceptive observation. Is it accurate? What do you think? Lisa replied, falling back into her characteristic indirect style. The Galactic Defense Council made their decision during an emergency session that lasted 14 hours. They would launch a formal investigation into what they had started calling the human anomaly. Every word Lisa spoke, every gesture she made, every interaction with students would be recorded and analyzed by the galaxy's most sophisticated monitoring systems. We need to understand exactly what she's doing, Veltar announced to the assembled technical team. Deploy quantum-level sensors in her classroom. Monitor neural patterns of attending students. Record everything. Droktal's crystalline form flickered with excitement as he supervised the installation of monitoring equipment. Devices smaller than atoms were embedded in the classroom walls. Sensors that could detect the slightest changes in brain chemistry were positioned throughout the room. Even the air itself was monitored for chemical traces that might indicate some kind of human pheromone influence. Lisa arrived for her next class unaware of the extensive surveillance. To her students, it appeared to be another normal session of her unconventional teaching style. The monitoring equipment, however, was recording everything at a level of detail that bordered on the molecular. "Today we're going to discuss communication," Lisa announced to her class. "But first, I want each of you to think about how your species naturally forms groups." She divided the students into species-specific clusters and asked them to observe their own behavior. The Brutarians automatically arranged themselves in a hierarchical formation with the strongest individual at the front. The Zephyrians formed a circle where everyone could see everyone else. The Etherians created a loose cloud formation that allowed them to share energy patterns. "Interesting," Lisa observed. "Each group organized itself differently, but each organization serves a purpose. Now, what happens when you need to work together?" She mixed the groups and asked them to solve a simple coordination problem, moving a heavy object from one side of the room to the other. At first, chaos ensued. The Brutarians wanted to assign leadership roles. The Zephyrians tried to reach consensus. The Etherians attempted to merge their energy patterns. "Stop," Lisa said after a few minutes of struggle. "What's the problem?" "We're using different approaches," said a Brutarian cadet. "Our methods don't combine well," added a Zephyrian officer. "We're fighting our own coordination instead of working together," observed an Etherian student. "Good," Lisa said. "Now try again, but this time, instead of using your species method, watch what the situation actually requires." In the observation, booth council members watched with growing fascination. The second attempt was completely different. Students stopped trying to impose their familiar organizational patterns and started responding to the immediate needs of the task. They formed a hybrid structure that borrowed elements from multiple approaches while creating something entirely new. "She's not teaching them what to think," Thysiara whispered. "She's teaching them how to think outside their species programming." The monitoring equipment was recording everything, but the data it collected defied easy analysis. Lisa's words were simple and direct, but their effect on student neural patterns was complex and subtle. She wasn't using any kind of technological influence or chemical manipulation. Her impact came entirely from the questions she asked and the exercises she designed. Admiral Korthak watched from the booth with growing understanding and frustration. During the past month, he had noticed changes in his own thinking that he couldn't entirely explain. Traditional Brutarian tactics that had served him well for decades suddenly seemed limited and inflexible. After the class, Korthak confronted Lisa in the corridor. "Human, I demand an explanation." "What would you like me to explain?" Lisa replied calmly. "What you're doing to us. What you're doing to our students. What you're doing to our systems." Lisa studied the massive alien warrior with genuine curiosity. "What do you think I'm doing?" Korthak's frustration boiled over. "Stop answering questions with questions. Tell me directly." "All right," Lisa said. "I'm teaching your students to recognize that their species' traditional methods are powerful but limited. I'm showing them that other approaches exist and can be learned. I'm encouraging them to think about problems from multiple perspectives, instead of defaulting to familiar solutions." Korthak processed this direct answer. And this improves our defense systems how? Because defense systems are operated by thinking beings, Lisa explained. Change how the operators think, and you change how the systems function, not through modification of the technology, but through optimization of its application. You're programming our people. No, Lisa said firmly. Programming implies installing specific responses to specific stimuli. I'm doing the opposite. I'm encouraging them to question programmed responses and develop flexible alternatives. That evening, the council reviewed the day's monitoring data. The technical readings were extraordinary in their ordinariness. Lisa used no advanced technology, no psychological manipulation techniques, no chemical or biological influences. Her methods were entirely based on structured learning experiences. She's a teacher, Nexus 7 concluded, after processing terabytes of data. An extremely sophisticated teacher, but nothing more than that. Then explain the system improvements, Veltar demanded. The system improvements result from operators who have learned to use existing capabilities in ways that exceed standard protocols, Nexus 7 replied. The technology hasn't changed. The thinking has changed. Droctal's crystalline, form shifted through confused color patterns. But that's impossible. Our systems are designed for optimal efficiency. They can't be significantly improved through operational changes alone. Thisara floated forward. Unless our definition of optimal efficiency was limited by our assumptions about how the systems should be used. The investigation continued for 2 more weeks. Every class was monitored, every student interaction was recorded, every system change was analyzed. The pattern that emerged challenged everything the council thought they knew about military training. Lisa wasn't teaching tactics in any traditional sense. She was teaching metacognition, thinking about thinking itself. Her students learned to recognize their own cognitive biases, question their assumptions, and approach problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously. When a student asked about fleet formations, Lisa might discuss bird migrations to illustrate principles of distributed coordination. When they wanted to know about defensive strategies, she would explore how different Earth ecosystems responded to threats. Each lesson connected military problems to broader patterns found throughout nature and society. She's teaching them to see their military training as one example of a larger class of solutions, Thisara explained to her colleagues. Instead of memorizing specific tactics, they're learning the underlying principles that make tactics effective. Admiral Jake Collins arrived during the 2nd week of the investigation. The senior human fleet commander was officially visiting to inspect Academy facilities. Unofficially, he was there to evaluate concerns about Lisa's teaching methods. Collins attended one of Lisa's classes and observed the monitoring equipment with professional interest. After the session, he met with the council members. Admiral Collins, Veltar began carefully, we need to understand human military doctrine. Your officers provide indirect answers that don't clarify your methods. Collins smiled. What would you like to know? How do humans achieve tactical superiority? Despite technological disadvantages? We don't achieve tactical superiority, Collins replied. We achieve tactical flexibility. Korthak leaned forward. Explain the difference. Superiority implies that you have better tools or techniques than your opponent, Collins said. Flexibility means that you can adapt your tools and techniques faster than your opponent can respond to them, and this adaptation process can be taught? Not as a set of rules or procedures, Collins explained, but as a way of thinking about problems, as a habit of questioning assumptions and exploring alternatives. The council members exchanged glances. Collins was providing more direct answers than previous human officers, but his explanations only deepened the mystery. So, human military. Training focuses on cognitive development rather than tactical instruction? Thyssara asked. Both, Collins said. But the cognitive development enables the tactical instruction. Students who learn to think flexibly can master any specific tactic quickly. Students who only learn specific tactics become helpless when those tactics prove insufficient. As the investigation concluded, the Council faced an unprecedented situation. They had identified exactly what Lisa was doing and how she was doing it. Her methods were completely transparent and entirely reproducible. Any species could adopt her approach to military education. The question was whether they wanted to. This changes everything, Veltar said during their final session. If cognitive flexibility is a teachable skill, then military doctrine based on species-specific approaches becomes obsolete. It threatens our entire educational tradition, Korthak added. Thousands of years of proven methods. Or it enhances our educational tradition, Thyssara countered. Thousands of years of proven methods, plus the ability to develop new methods when circumstances require them. The Academy's Grand Defense Exercise happened once every galactic year, and it was the most important event in military education. Every student, every instructor, and every system on Harmony Point would be tested in a coordinated simulation that replicated the worst-case scenario. A full assault on the Academy itself. For 800 years, the exercise had followed the same pattern. The attacking force would probe the station's defenses, identify weaknesses, and launch increasingly sophisticated assaults. The defending forces would respond according to established protocols, demonstrating their mastery of traditional defensive doctrine. The exercise always ended with partial success, enough to pass evaluation, but with clear areas for improvement. This year felt different from the beginning. Lisa stood in the main observation deck alongside the council members, watching, as students took their positions throughout the station. Defense coordinators moved to their posts, communication specialists activated their networks, and tactical teams prepared for the simulated attack. Simulation will commence in 60 seconds, announced the Academy's central computer system. Veltar reviewed the exercise parameters on his tablet. This year's scenario includes simultaneous attacks from multiple directions using different technological approaches. It's designed to test coordination between various defense systems. Your students will fail, Korthak said bluntly to Lisa. This exercise requires precise execution of proven defensive protocols. Creative thinking leads to chaos in coordinated operations. Lisa watched the defensive positions on the holographic display without responding. Students from different species had arranged themselves in patterns that didn't match any traditional formation. Instead of the rigid hierarchies that usually characterized such exercises, she saw fluid groupings that seemed to shift based on immediate tactical requirements. Simulation commencing, the computer announced. The attacking forces struck from 6 directions simultaneously. Conventional doctrine would have assigned specific defensive sectors to specific teams, creating clear chains of command and responsibility. But Lisa's students did something unprecedented. They began sharing information instantly across species lines. A Zephyrian sensor operator detected an anomaly in Sector 4 and immediately communicated with a Brutarian tactical team in Sector 7. An Etherian energy specialist in the central hub coordinated with crystalline engineers throughout the station to optimize power distribution in real time. This is not standard protocol, Veltar observed with concern. The attacking forces escalated their assault, expecting the defenders to respond with increasingly rigid adherence to established procedures. Instead, they encountered something they had never faced before, a defense that adapted faster than the attack could evolve. When the attackers probed Sector 2 with energy weapons, expecting a conventional shield response, they found that the defenders had rerouted power through unexpected pathways, creating defensive patterns that their weapons weren't designed to counter. When they attempted to jam communication frequencies, they discovered that the defending force had developed multiple backup communication methods during the exercise itself. Thisara's energy form pulsed with excitement. They're not following any single species defensive doctrine. They're creating hybrid approaches in real time. The most remarkable change was in the command structure. Traditional exercises relied on hierarchical command chains where senior officers made decisions and junior personnel executed them. But Lisa's students had developed something more flexible, distributed decision-making where the person with the best information and position made tactical choices, regardless of rank or species. A young Brutarian cadet took charge of the Western defense sector when she realized her position gave her the best view of the attacking force's movement patterns. A Zephyrian lieutenant coordinated the station's energy weapons because his species' natural mathematical abilities allowed him to calculate optimal firing solutions faster than the targeting computers. "They're not following command protocols," Korthak growled. "Junior officers are making strategic decisions without authorization." "Are they making good decisions?" Lisa asked quietly. Korthak studied the tactical display with growing amazement. The unauthorized decisions were not only good, they were brilliant. Students were anticipating enemy movements, coordinating responses across vast distances, and optimizing resource allocation in ways that exceeded anything he had seen in decades of military service. The exercise continued for 4 hours, far longer than usual. Typically, the attacking forces would achieve their objectives within 2 hours, demonstrating the limitations of static defensive thinking. But this time, every assault was not just repelled, but turned into a counterattack opportunity. The students weren't just defending against the simulated enemies. They were learning from each attack, adapting their methods, and developing new capabilities during the exercise itself. By the 3rd hour, they were using defensive systems in ways that surprised their own instructors. "How are they doing this?" Draktal wondered aloud as he watched his carefully designed defense grid perform beyond all theoretical limits. Nexus 7 processed the tactical data streams with mechanical precision. They are using existing systems in configurations that were never planned or programmed. They have essentially improvised new capabilities from standard equipment. The breakthrough moment came during the final assault phase. The attacking forces launched their most sophisticated attack, designed to overwhelm the Academy's defenses through sheer complexity. Simultaneous strikes from multiple directions using different types of weapons and tactics that required completely different defensive responses. Traditional defensive doctrine would have failed. No single species military training could have coordinated effective responses to such a diverse threat. But Lisa's students did something that had never happened in the exercise's 800-year history. They succeeded completely. Not only did they repel every attack, but they did so while maintaining station integrity, minimizing resource expenditure, and preserving their ability to respond to additional threats. For the first time ever, the grand defense exercise ended with total defensive victory. The observation deck fell silent as the simulation concluded. Council members stared at displays showing perfect defensive success using methods that appeared in no textbook and followed no established doctrine. Veltar turned to Lisa with a mixture of awe and confusion. Your students just accomplished the impossible. Did they? Lisa replied. Or did they demonstrate that our definition of impossible was limited by our assumptions about what was possible? Tessera floated closer to the tactical displays, studying the patterns of coordination that had emerged during the exercise. They created a new form of military organization, not based on any single species approach, but combining elements from multiple traditions into something entirely novel. Korthak was examining the performance data with the intensity of a warrior who had just witnessed a revolution in warfare. My student Karseth coordinated with an Etherian specialist to create a defensive strategy that combined Brutarian strength with Etherian energy manipulation. Such cooperation should be impossible. Our military philosophies are fundamentally incompatible. Are they? Lisa asked. Or do they become compatible when viewed from a broader perspective? As students returned from their positions throughout the station, their conversations revealed the depth of what had occurred. They weren't just discussing what they had done during the exercise. They were processing what they had learned about their own capabilities and the capabilities of their species mates from other worlds. A Zephyrian officer approached Lisa with excitement. Commander, during the exercise, I realized that my species' circular formations aren't just defensive patterns. They're information-sharing networks. When I combined that insight with Brutarian linear tactics, we created a communication system that was both protected and efficient. An Etherian student added, my energy-sensing abilities became much more effective when I learned to coordinate with crystalline computational processing. Together we could predict enemy movements with unprecedented accuracy. Lisa listened to these reports with satisfaction. Her students weren't just mastering tactical techniques. They were discovering that the apparent incompatibilities between different species' approaches to warfare were actually complementary capabilities waiting to be properly coordinated. Veltar approached Lisa as the observation deck emptied. Commander Martinez, I believe I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I thought your teaching methods were impractical philosophy. I now see that you were preparing our students for challenges that our traditional training could never have addressed. What do you see when you look at today's results? Lisa asked. Veltar considered the question carefully. I see students who have learned to think beyond the limitations of their species' military traditions. I see coordination between different approaches that creates capabilities greater than the sum of their parts. I see the emergence of a new form of military science. And what does that mean for the Academy? Veltar's 4 arms gestured as he processed the implications. It means that everything we thought we knew about military education was the Emergency Council session convened 12 hours after the Grand Defense exercise concluded. Representatives from the Academy Board of Directors attended via holographic projection from their home worlds. Military observers from allied species demanded explanations. The galaxy's most prestigious military institution had just achieved something that defied 8 centuries of established doctrine. We need a complete explanation, declared High Director Nalthek, whose ancient Voidwalker species had helped found the Academy. Our reputation depends on predictable, proven training methods. What occurred yesterday cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Veltar, Korthak, and Tessera sat around the council table facing Lisa, who had been formally summoned to explain her methods. The room's holographic displays showed detailed analyses of the previous day's exercise, highlighting coordination, patterns that appeared nowhere in galactic military literature. Commander Martinez, Veltar began carefully. The Galactic Defense Council formally requests that you provide a complete explanation of your instructional methodology and its effects on student performance. Lisa looked around the room at the assembled representatives. Some appeared curious, others seemed concerned, and a few looked openly hostile. She had known this moment would come eventually. "Where would you like me to begin?" she asked. "Begin with the truth," Korthak rumbled. "What are you teaching our students?" Lisa stood and activated the room's central holographic projector. Instead of displaying tactical formations or technical diagrams, she showed images of Earth's diverse ecosystems. Forests, oceans, mountains, deserts, and grasslands rotated slowly in the center of the room. "I'm teaching them to think like a planet," she said simply. The alien representatives exchanged confused glances. High Director Nalthek's ancient form leaned forward. "Elaborate." "Every species in this galaxy has perfected their approach to warfare," Lisa continued. "You've had thousands of years to optimize your tactics, strategies, and technologies. Each of you represents the pinnacle of your species' military evolution." She gestured toward the Earth images. "Humans never had that luxury. Our planet forced us to learn from everything that had ever figured out how to survive. Pack hunters, solitary predators, herd animals, swarm insects, parasites, symbiotes, and countless other approaches to existence and conflict." A new image appeared. Earth's evolutionary tree, showing the branching development of millions of species over billions of years. "We learned warfare not from a single military tradition, but from studying every form of conflict that our world had tested. When we reached the stars, we brought all of that knowledge with us." Thaisara's energy form pulsed with understanding. "You're teaching cognitive integration of multiple survival strategies." "More than that," Lisa replied. "I'm teaching students to recognize that their species' approach to warfare, no matter how perfect, is just one solution to the challenges of conflict. There are always other solutions, and sometimes combining solutions creates capabilities that exceed what any single approach can achieve." She changed the display to show recordings from her classes over the past months. Students watching her indirect lessons, struggling with her unconventional questions, gradually developing new ways of thinking about familiar problems. "You asked me to teach tactics," Lisa said. "But tactics are just tools. What matters is the mind that chooses which tool to use, when to use it, and how to use it in ways that its creators never imagined." Korthak studied the class recordings with growing comprehension. The vague answers, the philosophical questions, the stories about Earth's nature, all of it was designed to break down our students' species-specific assumptions about warfare. "Not break down," Lisa corrected. "Expand beyond. Your species' military traditions are powerful and valuable, but they're also limiting if they're the only approaches your students can imagine." She showed data from the defense grid improvements that had puzzled the Academy's engineers for months. The mysterious system enhancements weren't technological upgrades. They were the result of operators who had learned to see their equipment differently, to use existing capabilities in ways that their designers never considered. High Director Nalthek processed this information with the patience of a species that had lived for millennia. "You're describing psychological conditioning on a massive scale." "I'm describing education," Lisa replied. "The difference is consent and purpose. My students chose to learn new ways of thinking because they recognized the value of expanding their capabilities." Veltar consulted his analysis of the previous day's exercise. "But how did you know that combining different species approaches would create superior tactical capabilities?" Lisa smiled. Because Earth taught us that diversity creates resilience. When you face an unknown threat, the species with the most different survival strategies has the best chance of finding one that works. She displayed images from the Grand Defense exercise, showing how students had spontaneously developed hybrid tactics that combined elements from multiple military traditions. Yesterday, your students faced simulated threats that were specifically designed to overwhelm any single species' defensive doctrine. They succeeded because they weren't limited to any single species' defensive doctrine. They could draw from all of them. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The alien representatives were grappling with a fundamental challenge to their understanding of military science. This approach, High Director Nalthek said slowly, suggests that our military traditions, while effective, are inherently incomplete. Not incomplete, Lisa corrected. Specialized. Each of your species has developed brilliant solutions to specific types of challenges. The limitation isn't in your solutions, it's in thinking that your solutions are the only ones that work. Thisera floated closer to the displays showing student performance improvements. The defense grid enhancements occurred because operators trained in cognitive flexibility began using their systems as adaptive tools rather than rigid instruments. Exactly, Lisa said. Technology is only as capable as the minds that direct it. Change how operators think about their equipment, and you change what that equipment can accomplish. Korthak leaned back in his chair, his massive frame expressing something that might have been awe. During the exercise, I watched my student Karseth coordinate with an Etherian specialist to create a tactical approach that neither species could have developed alone. It was like watching the birth of a new form of warfare. Not new, Lisa said. Ancient. Earth has been combining different survival strategies for billions of years. We just learned to do it consciously. She changed the display one final time, showing a complex diagram that illustrated the relationships between different military approaches across species lines. Every species in the galaxy has perfected certain aspects of warfare while leaving other aspects underdeveloped. Brutarians excel at direct confrontation, but struggle with fluid adaptation. Zephyrians master coordination, but sometimes lack decisive leadership. Etherians understand energy manipulation, but have limited experience with physical logistics. The diagram showed how these apparent weaknesses became strengths when different species worked together, each contributing their specialized capabilities while compensating for their limitations. What I've been teaching your students is how to recognize these complementary relationships and leverage them tactically. Not to abandon their species' traditions, but to enhance them through cooperation with other traditions. High Director Nalthek's ancient voice carried a note of wonder. You've created a meta-doctrine that incorporates all of our individual doctrines while transcending the limitations of any single approach. I've taught your students to think the way Earth thinks, Lisa replied. Not like humans specifically, but like a world that has experimented with every possible approach to survival and learned from all of them. Veltar stood and began pacing, his forearms gesturing as he processed the implications. If this methodology can be replicated, it could revolutionize military education throughout the galaxy. It can be replicated, Lisa confirmed. But only if you're willing to question fundamental assumptions about how warfare should be taught and learned. The council members and board representatives spent the next several hours discussing the practical implications of Lisa's approach. Could traditional military academies adopt these methods? Would established military hierarchies accept tactics that emerged from mixed species cooperation? How would this affect the balance of power between different galactic civilizations? There's Something else you should consider, Lisa said as the discussion continued. The threats you've been preparing for are the threats you understand. But the galaxy is vast, and there are probably challenges out there that none of your traditional approaches can handle alone. Thisara pulsed with a color pattern that indicated deep concern. You're suggesting that unknown threats require unknown countermeasures. I'm suggesting that the best preparation for unknown threats is the ability to develop unknown countermeasures quickly, Lisa replied. That requires minds trained in adaptive thinking rather than memorized responses. 6 months after the Grand Defense exercise, the decision was made for them. Long-range sensor arrays detected something unprecedented approaching the outer regions of galactic space. The signals were artificial, clearly indicating an advanced civilization, but they followed no known technological patterns. More concerning, preliminary tactical analysis suggested that these unknown entities used strategic approaches that didn't match any established galactic military doctrine. Emergency session of the Galactic Defense Council announced the priority communication that reached every member world simultaneously. Unknown threat requires immediate strategic response. Lisa found herself in the Academy's main strategic center surrounded by holographic displays showing sensor data from across the galaxy. The approaching force was still months away, but their advanced scouts had already demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption about space warfare. They don't use traditional propulsion, reported Fleet Admiral Thane, the Crystalline, officer who commanded the galaxy's outer defense perimeter. Their ships move through space using methods our sensors can't identify. They don't follow predictable flight patterns. Most concerning, they've countered every probe we've sent with responses that appear to anticipate our tactics. Veltar studied the tactical data with growing concern. Our standard defensive protocols assume enemies that follow logical strategic principles. These entities appear to use approaches that defy conventional military logic. Korthak's massive frame dominated one side of the strategic center. My fleets are prepared for battle, but I cannot plan effective tactics against an enemy whose methods I cannot understand. That's exactly the problem, Thisara observed, her energy forms cycling through analytical patterns. Our military traditions, while powerful, are based on known approaches to warfare. We're facing something genuinely unknown. High Director Nalthek's image appeared via holographic projection. All member species have reported the same challenge. Our individual military doctrines provide no effective countermeasures against these tactical approaches. Lisa watched the strategic displays with professional interest. The approaching threat demonstrated exactly the kind of challenge she had been preparing the Academy's students to face. Enemies that couldn't be defeated using traditional methods. "What do our students think?" she asked quietly. Veltar looked up from his tactical analysis. "Students?" "The cadets trained in adaptive methodology," Lisa clarified. "They've learned to approach unfamiliar problems from multiple perspectives. Have you asked them to analyze this threat?" The council members exchanged glances. In traditional military hierarchies, strategic planning was reserved for senior officers with decades of experience. Student opinions weren't typically considered in operational decisions. "It's worth trying," Thisara said finally. "Conventional analysis has provided no useful insights." Within hours, students who had attended Lisa's classes were assembled in working groups throughout the Academy. Instead of being given predetermined analytical frameworks, they were simply presented with the sensor data and asked a simple question. "What do you see?" The results were immediate and remarkable. They're not using traditional tactics because they're not thinking about space warfare the way we do, observed Karseth, the Brutarian cadet who had learned strategic flexibility. We assume that space combat follows the same basic principles as planetary combat, just in 3 dimensions. But what if space itself offers tactical opportunities that ground-based thinking can't recognize? A mixed-species team led by the Zephyrian, Officer Rixtal, identified movement patterns that senior analysts had dismissed as random. "These aren't random maneuvers," Rixtal reported. "They're using gravitational fields, electromagnetic phenomena, and stellar radiation as tactical elements. They're fighting with the environment instead of just fighting in the environment." An Etherian student named Vashati made the most significant breakthrough. "Their technology doesn't match our patterns because it's not based on the same fundamental assumptions. We build weapons to destroy targets. They appear to build tools that redirect, influence, and transform targets. They're not trying to win battles the way we understand battles. They're trying to achieve objectives that we haven't learned to recognize." Within 48 hours, the students had developed tactical insights that exceeded anything produced by conventional military analysis. More importantly, they had begun developing countermeasures that drew from multiple species' military traditions while creating entirely new approaches. "Combine Brutarian directness with Etherian energy manipulation," suggested one working group. "Use the psychological pressure of direct assault to mask the subtle influence of energy redirection. Coordinate Zephyrian information networks with crystalline computational processing," proposed another team. "Create communication systems that can adapt faster than the enemy can disrupt them. Most importantly," added a third group, "don't try to fight them using any single species doctrine. Use all of our doctrines simultaneously, creating tactical complexity that exceeds their ability to predict and counter." The tactical innovations developed by the students were tested in advanced simulations. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Mixed-species teams using adaptive methodologies consistently outperformed traditional forces by significant margins. Fleet Admiral Thane reviewed the simulation data with amazement. "These cadets have developed countermeasures that our most experienced strategists couldn't imagine. They're thinking about warfare in ways that transcend our species-specific limitations." The Galactic Defense Council faced their moment of decision. They could deploy conventional forces using traditional tactics, likely resulting in limited effectiveness against the unknown threat. Or they could implement the adaptive methodology developed by Lisa's students, fundamentally changing how galactic military forces operated. High Director Naltek made the announcement during an emergency session broadcast to every member world. The Galactic Defense Council formally adopts the adaptive strategic methodology developed at Harmony Point Academy. All military forces will implement mixed-species coordination protocols and adaptive tactical training immediately. Lisa found herself appointed as Director of Strategic Education for the entire galactic military system. Her first task was to establish training programs that would prepare military personnel from all member species to think beyond their traditional approaches to warfare. "This will change everything," Veltar observed as they planned the new curriculum. "Military academies throughout the galaxy will need to restructure their entire approach to education." "Good," Lisa replied. "Change means growth. Stagnation means vulnerability." The new training programs were implemented with unprecedented speed. Military personnel from every species learned to question their assumptions, explore alternative approaches, and coordinate with members of other species in ways that had never been attempted. When the unknown threat finally reached galactic space, 6 months later, they encountered something they clearly hadn't expected: a defense force that could adapt faster than their attacks could evolve. The resulting conflict lasted only 3 standard days, not because the galactic forces were overwhelmingly superior, but because they could respond to each new tactical approach with creative countermeasures that the unknown entities couldn't predict or counter. More remarkably, the conflict ended, not with the destruction of the unknown force, but with communication. The entities, faced with opponents who could match their tactical flexibility, chose negotiation over continued warfare. "They're explorers," reported the first diplomatic contact team. "They've been testing our defensive capabilities to determine whether we represented a threat to their expansion into this region of space. Our adaptive responses convinced them that we could coexist rather than compete." A year later, Lisa stood in her new classroom at the expanded Galactic Strategic Academy. Her students now included military officers from the former unknown threat species who had agreed to share their own tactical innovations in exchange for learning galactic adaptive methodology. Today, we're going to discuss the most important lesson in strategic thinking, Lisa announced to the mixed group of beings from 14 different species and civilizations. "What is the difference between a warrior and a weapon?" A young Brutarian officer raised his hand. "A warrior thinks, and a weapon just does what it's designed to do." "A warrior can adapt to new situations," added an Etherian cadet. "A weapon has fixed capabilities.